My name is Keeley, and I'm really excited to be here at GitHub Maintainer Summit with all of you. Both excited to give this talk today, and also excited to spend the next 2 days with you in GatherTown, just swapping stories and talking about different topics. So thanks for joining me today as we kick off the Measuring Success portion of Maintainer Summit. I'm going to give a quick talk about OKRs, and specifically how we go through the process of creating our own OKRs for the project that I help maintain, Electron. So to introduce myself, hello, my name is Keeley Hammond. I'm a senior software engineer at Slack and one of the maintainers of Electron. And I am here hiking with my brother and my sister. So Electron is something that some of you may be familiar with already. I know we're among open source people here. But for those of you who haven't used Electron or aren't familiar with it, Electron is a JavaScript framework that allows developers to create desktop applications with web technologies. Two examples that you might be familiar with from your own day-to-day are Slack and VS Code. Both are powered by Electron. I'm really proud to be part of Electron. I think there are a lot of things that we do very well and that we've built a pretty strong community. But one of the things I think that we do really well is something I'm going to talk about today. And I'm so excited that this talk is right after the lunch break because I think it's a topic that we can all get really excited about, which is OKRs. Yes, we all love them. We all look forward to them. I don't need to talk to any of you here about, things like, oh, why are they important? Why are they not a waste of time? But let's go ahead and do that anyway, for those of you who are skeptical. So I think that a lot of people are justifiably hesitant to dive into OKRs because I think they often have big synergy energy where they feel like less of a valuable tool that you as a maintainer can use to help grow your project and more like a management measurement, I guess, or a yardstick that could possibly be punitively used against you. And I think there's some justification to that feeling. I think when you do create goals and OKRs in general, you need to be intentional about why you're doing it and how you're doing it. But I think there's a lot of practical reasons too for an open source project to have public OKRs. Trying to gather funding is one very real reason. I think that's easier to do when you have goals and noticeable progress that you can point to. Going to companies and justifying employee time spent on open source is also a lot easier to make that argument to management when you have, say, a roadmap or public OKRs. But I think really the spirit behind OKRs or goals or whatever you want to use, we personally use OKRs, but I really think you can use any format you like, is just having a strong understanding of where your project is healthy and why that is. Some of the things that we really think about and opportunities we try to maximize when we're going through the process of setting OKRs are actually gaining feedback from our maintainers and contributors so we can spot maybe blind spots that we miss going through our day-to-day. We can reflect on things we've done really well in the past year and maybe areas that have been a considerable source of pain for a lot of people that we just never got together to talk about. We can anticipate future changes, which, as all of us in software, fortunately or unfortunately know, is often very important. Things change quickly, and it's easy to get caught off guard by that. But I think one of the biggest reasons, and I stole a phrase here from Jacob Groundwater, who is one of the core maintainers of Electron as well, is saving valuable human time. We only have so many hours here on this earth. We only have so many keystrokes in our fingers. And by being intentional about where we're spending our time, we can make the most out of what we're doing and make sure that the people working on our project get to do work that they really enjoy. For example, if you're restarting CI for the third time, trying to get your PR to merge, that's probably not time as well spent as working on a feature that you're really excited about. And I think getting together to talk about OKRs and doing that planning process is a good time to reflect on that. All right, so now that I've sold you, now that you're very passionate about OKRs and everything management, how do we actually go through setting OKRs within Electron? So I'm going to walk through our process. I know some of you may have your own processes, which I'd really like to talk about while we're here, but this is just how we personally have done it for the past few years. So every year we host a summit. We call this Electron Maintainer Summit. So this isn't really an Electron conference or meetup. It's not open to everyone. It's more of a semi-open event. We've welcomed folks from supplementary communities like Chromium and Node in the past, but ultimately we really want to focus on active maintainers and active contributors, people that are really spending their time in the project. And these are just some of these lovely people. These are pictures that were actually taken at past summits of our maintainer base and our contributor base. And the way Maintainer Summit works is very basic. We gather together our core maintainers and contributors, our most active folks. We put everybody in one room for 1 week. We have a lot of easels, we have a lot of sticky notes, and it gives ourselves some time to brainstorm and talk about various things that happened over the past year. We typically try to do these in person. I'll walk through different cities and different time zones that we try to accommodate. Last year, we did things a little differently. I don't entirely recall why. I think pretty much everything that could happen happened last year. But so we moved to a remote summit for the first time last year, which basically followed the similar format. All maintainers, all contributors, but rather than meeting physically in person, we had Zoom calls for various sessions. And we also used an online whiteboard service called Miro, which worked very well for us. So planning summit usually takes about 6 months out. We have a core group that plans summits and thinks about the logistics behind them. And the way we usually start planning for summits is gathering dates and times from our maintainer and contributor community. So we can try to accommodate as many people as possible and make sure that the dates and times work for them. We have a lot of people across many different time zones, many different cities. And so trying to make sure that we're accommodating those people fairly is very important to us. This is not a real schedule, but it's very, very close to one. And you can just see the various time zones that we have, the various dates that are here. And we try to plan as far out as possible just so that we can make those accommodations for people in different time zones in different cities. We also try to cycle out our host cities. So for example, if we host a maintainer summit in, say, London 1 year or in Europe, we might try to host it in the Pacific time zone the next year and cycle through different time zones to better accommodate people. After we kind of have a sense of where we're going to go, the dates and times we need to accommodate, we then move on to the big topics we want to discover. So we only have 1 week, and so we really need to keep our discussion very focused and tight. A good place to start is our working groups. So these are our public working groups as part of governance. You can see security, releases, outreach, etc. And at the end of Summit, we need to set OKRs for each of these working groups, but we also allow for discussion of other topics. Say if we need to deprecate the remote module in Electron, which is a real thing that we did just go through, we may have a topic at Summit specifically for discussing that and how we can alleviate pain for any app developers down the road. All right, so we've identified topics, we've gotten schedules from everyone, fantastic. What we do next is organize pre-sessions. So as I said, we have usually a lot of ground to cover and only 1 week to do it in. So we want to maximize that time as much as possible. So these pre-sessions are typically 30 minutes to an hour. If there's any data that we want to pull that we want to have at Summit, we can use these sessions to talk about, oh, let's pull a query for this or let's look at that before we all meet together. And we can decide what we think is the most important to accomplish in person. So what are, say, the 3 topics that we really want to make sure we discuss while we're all together? We also do facilitator training, and this is actually one of my favorite things about Summit, and it's how I personally got involved in Summit. So each session at Summit, and they're about an hour each, needs to have a facilitator to make sure we stay on track, that we ultimately land on actionable items, etc. And what we try to do is get facilitators from the maintainer group to volunteer and contribute their own time. And these people don't need to be experts on the topic that's being discussed. In fact, oftentimes it's better if they're not. And if you have, say, newer or more junior members that you'd like to pull more actively into your community, training them to be a facilitator is a great way to do that. Because we provide training, they can feel like they get more involved, but are actually given tools and techniques that they can use. So, it's not just throwing them right into the fire. All right, so we've done our planning, 6 months down, organized schedules, figured out topics, trained facilitators. Yes, now we're at Summit. We are going to OKR everything. We take this very seriously. It is a very solemn event, as you can see from this very real Miro board from our last Summit. So during Summit, this really is a time where we get together. I don't want to make it sound like it's all stuffy and stuffed shirts. We do spend a lot of time having lunch together, pairing, discussing things in the hallway. But ultimately, when it comes down to business, we want to make sure we tackle all of our scheduled topics. So each topic is given about an hour-long slot. And for each hour-long slot, we have one facilitator and one note taker. That way, everyone else can have discussions and not worried about anything getting lost. We'll know they'll be recorded in the notes. Typically, what we do is we start sessions with a sticky note brainstorm. So, say 5 or 10 minutes for people to just write down all of their ideas, all of their thoughts, somewhat narrowed in from the pre summit session, but a fairly open brainstorm. And then once those are all up, the facilitator will group all of the sticky notes together into common themes that we can then go into deeper dives on. So this is an example of one that we did for outreach. You can see the broad categories we start with are things that work well, new ideas, and then things we want to improve. And then we took the topics and gathered them into various groups. And it's important to note here that when you are in the brainstorming session, no idea is a bad idea. No idea is a bad idea. I actually think this was my sticky, so sorry to all the outreach folks here. But once you've kind of finished the brainstorming session and you've aggregated everything into your topics, then it's the facilitator's role to narrow those down and move us from brainstorming mode into something a little bit more actionable. So of the topics that we aggregate, and there could be 5, 6, 7, you can see back here, we have maybe about 7 groups. We then choose 1 or 2 to focus on and really talk about. And at the end of that discussion, we want to at least have tried to land on a rough objective. So what's something that we really want to focus on for the next year? And what are 2 to 3 ways that we can measure whether or not we succeeded in that goal? And it's important to note this all happens during an hour session, which is not a lot of time, but we land at least on something rough. And then at the end of Summit, the end of the week, we'll go back, look at all of our OKRs again, and refine them a little bit. Say, we had an outreach session early in Summit and then had another discussion 2 days later in Summit that might have influenced the way we want to shape our OKRs. At the end of the week, we'll have time to go back and reflect and tweak them a little bit. So just as an example, these were the OKRs that came out of our outreach working group for our last summit in 2020. And we have an objective, and then we have 3 initiatives that we really want to move forward to achieve the objective. And we also have 3 ways to measure if we're successful or not. So one thing that's consistently challenging, and I don't think just for Electron, I think this is kind of a common theme, is narrowing down the focus to get you to one objective. And I noticed there's several themes that we within Electron tend to come back to when we're talking about goals. One is one that I've talked about many times in this talk. It actually inspired the title for this talk, but sparing valuable human time, making sure that you're maximizing the time that your maintainers are spending in the project where they're really enjoying their work and not feeling like they're doing things like managing flaky CI, trying to get their PR merged, etc. So focusing on that is something that informs a lot of our objectives. We also are constantly looking at user and developer experience, and I'm sure this is something that you all can relate to as well. How can we make upgrading apps easier? How can we make our docs better? These are all things I think we face, and so it's helpful when we look back at the objectives that we're putting forth of thinking, okay, are those objectives furthering these goals, these things that are ultimately really important to us? So Summit ends, we have rough objectives, we have rough key results, we have rough initiatives. After Summit, we have a chance to review those finals OKRs again. And what we typically do is review them in the individual working groups for Electron. These working groups usually meet either twice a month, once a month. And so we'll take our time at our next meeting to actually review the OKRs, make sure we still like them, and then publish them publicly to our governance repo. So if you go to Electron's governance repo today and look at, say, the outreach working group, for example, you can see our current objectives, key results, and initiatives in the README. I think one really good example, one set of OKRs that I like actually came from our releases working group in 2019. Save expensive human time by offloading work to inexpensive computers. I thought the objective was really clear, and then I think the key results to measure whether or not we're successful are also very clear. So at this point, you may be thinking, oh, okay, well, we already do something like this, but maybe we can improve upon it. Or maybe you don't really set OKRs right now and you'd like to slowly move into doing so. I'd love to talk to you more in the hallway over the next 2 days about how we could modify this for your project. But I think some of the key points that we've discovered in planning various summits over the years are to start planning early, especially if you have a lot of different maintainers and contributors across time zones and cities. It's good to start that process and find those dates as early as possible. It's also helpful to get feedback and rope in some volunteers as early as you can, just to make planning a bit more smooth. As you're going through the planning process, keeping focuses small is very helpful. It's better to have one objective that you execute on very well as opposed to five that you execute on in a scattershot way. Knowing when to brainstorm and when to actually take an idea, commit to it, and refine it is also huge. It'll keep you from spinning on one topic. And then allowing changes at different stages of the process. So we talk about our goals before summit, at different points during summit, and then again after summit, and giving yourself that flexibility to say, you know what, that sounded great a week ago. I think now, after thinking about it more, we'd like to change it a bit. Helps a lot in creating some OKRs that I think you can ultimately be more proud of. Before I close here, I want to give a shout out to two people within the Electron project who I think have done a huge job in influencing Summit to make it what it is today and making our OKR process so successful. Sophia Nye and Jacob Groundwater are both maintainers on Electron, and they have really shaped what Summit looks like today. So thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Jacob. I don't think we would have a Summit as successful as we do without you. So thank you all so much for listening to this talk. I'm really excited to talk to you all a little bit more over the next 2 days, listen to your own talks, and think about how we can make our projects better. So thank you very much and hope you have a good rest of the day.